figure out that thing's smarter than I am. Yeah. Yeah. You got some significance? Is it other? Kind of. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about it. This looks like let's just take a little age to it. Five. Yeah, we're going to talk about it. It's actually it'll blow your mind. Some people it freaks out a little bit. Some people don't care for it. So, oh, is it that time? Yeah. I don't know. I'm a preacher.
So hello, everybody. Hopefully our crowd accumulates as time goes on, but we'll see. And hello to people that are watching on Facebook. So today we're very excited to have Mr. CJ Plogger. I think this is the third year you've done this for Hungry for History, and it's something new and something interesting every time. So thank you all for coming, and I'll let him have it.
Well, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. I'm very honored to be here and honored to talk a little bit about the history of the penitentiary. And today I'm going to be talking about the latest book that I've had published. It's called 365 Days in the West Virginia Penitentiary, and we're going to be pulling facts out from that. But a little bit about me. Again, my name is CJ Plogger. I'm the pastor at the Ash Avenue Church of God. In October, I'll be starting my 30th year of ministry. So I've been doing it for a little while, and I started writing when I moved here 5 years ago about the penitentiary, but also I'm starting to do a little more Christian fiction right now. And I'm really excited because I just was informed that a couple of months ago, I was just informed that my first Christian fiction book is going to be published by the 6th top Christian publisher of the world. And so I'm really excited about that. That should be coming out in about, thank you. That should be coming out in about 4 months. And I just finished another book, another Christian fiction book, and I'm working on one in a little bit, and it's kind of an interesting genre that you don't hear about a lot in the Christian world, and I'm actually working on a Christian murder mystery. So you'll have to see how that turns out a little bit later. Afterwards, after my presentation, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a little bit about the books. But what I want to do before I start presenting things to you, I do want to tell you a little bit about, I have a puzzle behind me. This has some special significance. In 1955, there was a young woman that was going to Sunday school. And what happened is her Sunday school teacher told her, you know what, you need to write a letter to the prisoners who are on death row. Well, she wrestled with it for quite a while. And so what she decided to do is she decided to write a letter to Elmer Bruner, who was the last person executed in West Virginia on April 3rd, 1959. And she wrote Elmer Bruner this letter. He's going to be executed just a few months after that. And what takes place is he writes her back the letter. I have a copy of that letter here that you should read. And also, he made this puzzle for her. So this puzzle was made by the last person that was executed in the state of West Virginia. Very, very interesting. Okay, we're going to get started. I need one of you young ladies. I'm going to put you to work. So who's the bravest of one of you two young ladies? Neither of them. Look at that. All right, come on, because I'm going to put you to work. You're going to have, since we don't have PowerPoint, I'm going to be passing out some pictures. All right, again, what I'm going to be doing is talking a little bit about the books. And what I decided to do is take 3 dates out of each month. And so we've got 36 points. Don't worry, I'm a pastor. I will do an altar call at the end. And so we're going to go through there, and I'm going to try to get you out fairly early. But I encourage you, get the book. It's not that I'm trying to be a salesman, but I had such a hard time picking 3 things because some of the stories are sad. Some of the stories are exciting. Some of the stories will break your heart. Some will cause you to laugh. So we're going to talk about January 1st, of course. Go ahead, please. And what's your name? Jeriel. Jeriel? Let's thank Jeriel for her help. Yes. Well, okay, settle down, Jeriel. All right. So here we go. I'm going to be passing that. And go ahead and just pass around. This is audience participation. Look at that. What you're seeing right there, of course, happened on January 1st. 1986, what was that the kickoff of? Some of you know as much history as the pen as I do, of course. That was the kickoff of one of the riots, the 1986 riot, led by the Avenger Gang. That is a picture right there of Governor Archmore walking the hostages out. The one hostage in front is Robert Henderson. He was a food service worker. And then the one to your right of those two is Roger Johnson. And Roger Johnson actually goes to my church. Very interesting person. So in the book, we talk about for every day of the year, there's several facts. For some, there's only a couple. For some, there's up to 4 and 5. So that was on January 1st. Next picture I want you to pass around. This is my buddy. I did have the guys who are executed. One of the books that I've written is about the 94 executions at the penitentiary. And in the book 365, it does mention just a blurb about the executions. If you want to know more, then you got to get the execution book. But people ask me all the time, who is your favorite guy who got executed? I mean, what story just caused you the most? And the picture you got, matter of fact, hold that up so people can see it kind of. You can look around and then pass that around. Greely Blankenship. You know, I love Greely because he was living in Kentucky with his wife and with his 2 children. And he was sitting one night in the warm Kentucky summer, and he turned to his wife and he said, you know what? I just can't forget my first girlfriend in West Virginia. I just can't get over. You know, you never forget your first love. You don't forget your first handhold, your first kiss, your first walk in the park. And so his wife said, well, you know what? If you miss her so much, why don't you go get her and bring her back here and she can live with us? And so Greely came to West Virginia. He grabbed his West Virginia sweetheart, his girlfriend, and started to take her back to Kentucky. Well, her husband didn't like that. And so they kind of got into a fight. Greely claimed self-defense, but the man did die. And so Greely is hanged here. He is loved so much by the inmates at the penitentiary that they actually, oh, you don't need to collect him, honey. We'll just have him hold on to him. Yeah, that's your job, sir. All right, thank you. And so what we do is again, when you think of Greely, always remember you never forget your first love. On January 31st, one of the interesting facts, there were 2 men that were brought to the penitentiary from Wetzel County, probably New Martinsville, and they served a 2-year sentence for stealing cows. And so if you steal a cow, then you're in a lot of trouble. Everything in the book is sourced. It's either the Moundsville Weekly Echo, Moundsville Journal, Moundsville Daily Echo, Charleston Gazette, Wheeling Intelligencer, Wheeling News Register. So every fact that you're hearing, every fact that's in the book is actually documented. So if you're curious, well, did this really happen, or I want to read more about it, then you're going to find some of it. February 7th, we've got a picture. February 7th is a guy that some of you may have heard of or have known. Anybody know Donald Bordenkircher? Donald Bordenkircher, interesting character. He was a warden twice at the penitentiary, kind of a tough guy. And actually on this date, on 1975, he goes to Saudi Arabia for 11 weeks. He got 11-week absence for the penitentiary, and he sets up the penal system for the Saudi Arabia government. And so he was one of our guys. Of course, for those of you who probably know him more well than I do, but again, after he became the penitentiary, became the sheriff. And so very kind of interesting guy. Now, February 14th, this is interesting because what is February 14th? Valentine's Day. So on February 14th, John Downey was sentenced to the penitentiary for bigamy. So if you had too many wives, you went to the penitentiary. So that was interesting in 1946. February 19th, we got an interesting guy, a guy named Tommy Mallahan. Any of you remember Tommy Mallahan except for Maggie? I'm going to be introducing Maggie in a little bit. Tommy Mallahan, kind of a Fred Flintstone kind of guy, kind of likable guy, liked to break out of the pen all the time and broke out 3 times. I write him, and he doesn't write me back, Turkey. He's a little bit older right now. But on this date in 1992, he and Freddie Hamilton and I write back and forth. I thought about bringing some letters, but I thought we've got enough stuff already. And a guy named David Williams actually tunneled out of a greenhouse in the penitentiary. And Tommy, whenever Tommy escaped, he always went to Cameron. That's where he hung out. That's where the people loved him. He would break into their house, take some of their food, their cigarettes. He would leave a note for them and say, hey, I'm sorry, when I get some money, I'll pay you back. And Freddie, of course, gets caught in Oklahoma. And Freddie made a statement to a reporter that he was headed to California, to Pebble Beach, to play in a professional golf tournament. I asked Freddie if that was true. He said no, it was just something funny he said at the time. David Williams, actually, when he escaped from the greenhouse and they tunneled down, what he actually did was David Williams actually ended up going to New Martinsville and keeping the Bohr family, Lane and Barbara Bohr, hostage for 11 hours. He committed suicide in Mount Olive Correctional Complex 2 years ago in 2018. So next picture we have is March 11th. And again, these are all dates in the book. These are all pictures in the book. They tell a little bit more that I'm sharing now. March 11th, this is the first correctional officer that died in the line of duty. There were three correctional officers and one law enforcement officer that we're going to be talking about that were actually died in the history of the penitentiary. That in some ways is incredible, because the penitentiary was one of the most violent penal institutions in the United States. And thankfully, we only had a small amount of correctional officers that did give the ultimate sacrifice, but even one is too much. And so what happened on this day, on March 11th, is Henry Jackson actually stabbed the correctional officer, Earl Langfit, in the neck, and Earl Langfit passed away, becoming the first casualty. Henry Jackson is actually going to be, Henry Jackson is actually going to be executed later on September 10th of that year, 1926. And so the picture you have is the first correctional officer who lost his life there. March 18th, I did have to throw him in. That's what you got to get the book, because I picked three dates, and then I went back and I looked, I said, oh, I got to use this one. It's better than this one. You're going to enjoy it. But I got to have Harry Powers. Harry Powers is very interesting. He was born Herman Drenth, and very, very kind of odd character. He looks like a librarian, looks like a professor. And what he would do is he would advertise in a magazine called the American Friendship Society, published out of Grand Rapids, Michigan. It costs the women, it costs them $1.95 per subscription a year. It costs men $4.95. If you're a widow or widower, you could advertise in the back of it, called the Lonely Hearts Club. So what Harry Powers would do is he would go ahead and he would advertise, and he would look for women. My favorite ad, and my wife didn't let me put it in the book, but my favorite ad was that if you're a woman and came to live with him, that he would give you $100 a week. You didn't have to do any cooking, cleaning, or domestic chores, and you only had to perform wifely duties when you wanted to. Hundreds of women respond. And so what we believe is Harry Powers has murdered 55 women. And of course, he gets hanged for Dorothy Presler and Asta Eicher. There's a famous writer that used to live around here, Davis Grubb, and he wrote a book loosely based on him called Night of the Hunter, which actually is then made into a blockbuster movie. And so Harry Powers was one of our kind of interesting guys. March 20th, got a picture of that. And isn't Gerald doing a great job? Excellent. Are the dates written on there? Oh, okay. I thought she was really smart. Well, good. She is that smart, ladies and gentlemen. So March 20th, there was a riot in 1973. 5 correctional officers were taken hostage. Thank the Lord, they were not hurt. They were not injured. One inmate named Willie Hale, who had been kind of a snitch and kind of a warden's pet, kind of a tough guy, he actually is very brutally, very, very grotesquely and horrifically murdered. And so the 1973 riot was one that took place. Did any of you remember the 73 riot? Okay. So, all right. Now, 11, no, we'll take the mugshot on this one, please. This is interesting. Tommy Williams, there was in 1956, and some of you may remember this, but in 1956, a 9-year-old boy named David Powell was murdered on Wheeling Island. He was murdered by Tommy Williams and Joseph Williams. They were twins, and he was known as the Scout Slayer. And Tommy Williams, he was only 14 years old. He was up for execution, but they didn't want to execute him because he was so young. And so he was actually sent to the penitentiary for 12 years. I met Tommy, and he just recently, about a year ago, moved to Florida. And I spent the day that before he went to Florida, I spent the entire day with him. And Tommy told me story after story after story. And he had a journal that he kept of every day of the penitentiary, a mugshot, documents, incident reports. He had just a plethora of information. And I said, Tommy, what are you going to do with all that information? And he said, I'm going to throw it away. I said, what? I said, give it to me. And so that is actually, it is a copy, but that is actually a copy of his mugshot. So that was a 14-year-old that we had in the penitentiary in 1956. Now, a good part about it is he did rehabilitate. He did, after he left the penitentiary, he did go live in Martins Ferry. He became the city painter and actually lived a very productive life. So he's down in Florida now. I've had to actually have been contacted to write a book about his life. And so we'll see what goes on down the way. Next guy is on April 16th. This is kind of an interesting guy. This is a guy I'm a little bit familiar with, Ronald Turney Williams. How many of you have heard that name before? Ronald Turney Williams. This is on April 16th. This is when he's actually placed on the FBI top 10 most wanted list. About 2.5, 3 years ago, I wrote Ron and said, hey, I got some questions for you. Would you talk to me? And he said, sure. So since then, I've got thousands of letters from him, thousands of pages of letters. He calls me a couple times a week. Prior to COVID, I would go down and visit him. And so we've actually written a book about his life. It's called Wayward Genius. It is finished, but it's in the editing process, and they want me to make 3 more chapters. They want me to kind of stretch some things out. And so I'm going to do a little bit about that. But he's convicted of murdering David Lilly, a Beckley, West Virginia police officer, on May 12, 1975. And then when the 79 escape, which I'll be talking about in just a second, when they escape in 1979, I'm going to get to that in just a little bit. Phil Kessner gets killed. And then Ronald Turney Williams is in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he murders John Bonacek. And for that, he's then placed on the FBI top 10 most wanted list. Only inmate in the West Virginia Penitentiary placed on the FBI top 10 most wanted list. That is actually they call it the identification order. If you're old enough, you remember that they used to hang up on the post office, the faces. They don't do that anymore. So April 26th is kind of an interesting story in the book. I don't have a picture with that, but in the subcategory, what I put is the Jilted Lover, because Annie Hall was in love with Correctional Officer Rufus Childers. I mean, she was in love, but she had her heart broken when he returned from vacation with a new bride. So her heart was broken, and so she was disappointed and forlorn, and so she took a .32 caliber revolver and she fired at the Correctional Officer Childers. Fortunately, the bullet tore through his coat and didn't strike him. She was arrested, but she was set free a little bit later after her trial. So she was a little heartbroken. May 1st, the story we talk about, is on May 1st. There's a couple of sneaky inmates. An inmate that Maggie's familiar with is a buddy of mine, Johnny Burton, and Donald Williamson they had escaped prior from North Hall, which was very, very difficult to do, as it's all caged up and everything. But they got caught on this day in 1971 on May 1st because they were in the process of making dummies to put under their sheet to hide. And so Johnny Burton and Donald Williamson had escaped prior, but they got caught going out again. May 5th, this is kind of one of the situations that kind of breaks your heart that's in the book. The mother of Benton Amos. There was a little guy named Benton Amos. His mother was widowed when he was just a few years old, and she asked the neighborhood family to take care of him. Well, they said, okay. And she said, you know what? I've got to go out of town. I've got to work. I'll be back. She wasn't back for a few months. And in the process, when she came back, that family had moved away. And so here she is. She doesn't know where her 5-year-old son is. And then 20 years later, she's actually visits the penitentiary to visit someone else. And she sees her son. She sees her 5-year-old son. She's not seen him for 20 years. And what happens is she is traveling to Charleston to talk to the governor to get her son out of the West Virginia Penitentiary. But unfortunately, he died as she was traveling of consumption. So it's kind of a sad story. So a mother missing her child, not knowing where he's at, and finding him in a prison, and then trying to get him released. He goes ahead and doesn't make it. May 15th, we have a picture. This is a picture you're all very familiar with. This is of the mound. And so, because what happened in 1909 is first the R.J. McFadden family owned the mound. And originally, they really thought about tearing it down. They really processed, let's tear it down. We can build houses. We can make some money. And thankfully, the state, and actually the Daughters of the American Revolution were very, very instrumental. The state said no. So in 1909, the penitentiary actually receives the maintenance and care of the mound. And so did any of you remember seeing any inmates working up on the mound, mowing the grass and shoveling snow and cutting trees, stuff like that? So 1909 is when the penitentiary becomes in charge of this. On June 10th, we have a picture of the wheel. And on June 10th, the second correctional officer that passed away, that died in the West Virginia Penitentiary, was A.H. Evans. A.H. was 56 years old, and at the wheel, which is the spinning place where you come in and out in the old part of the prison, what happened was he had a stroke. There was no inmate involvement, but what we see is that he was the second officer to actually die on duty. I like this next picture. I don't have a picture of her. This is a book I really want to write. But we did have women at the penitentiary until 1947. But we had one bad chick. Her name was Ada Cross. And she was actually a federal prisoner, but she was so bad that the federal prison said, we got to send her to Moundsville. We got to send her to the worst place we can think of. And so Ada Cross that we see, and this is the headline. I'm not trying to be politically incorrect. Don't worry, it's not that bad, but I'm sure someone somewhere will be offended. So here we see is on July 6th, we have a picture of boxing. And that's because at the penitentiary, we had boxing and also wrestling, and there were baseball games, football games. How many of you went in and watched any kind of sporting event at the penitentiary? Yep. How much did you pay? Do you remember? $0? Okay. I was told that some people paid 50 cents and some people later had to pay $5, but you didn't pay anything. You didn't sneak in, did you? Did you sneak in? Okay, well, I was going to say a quarter. Okay. Friday night fights. Okay. Excellent. July 8th. Do I have a picture of this guy? I do. Oh, the headline. Okay, thank you. July 8th, again, is one of the snippets in the book. And July 8th talks about it was a life termer named Tony Gradison, 32 years old, received a life term and decided he just couldn't take it. He didn't want to live in prison, so he actually started to starve himself, started a fast, a starvation, and before West Virginia could make him eat, then he did die of starvation because he did everything he could to not. So this is kind of interesting. On July 23rd, we have this was in 1936. The oldest inmate we had in 1936 was John Atkins, and he had broken and entered into a house at 76 years old. Now, this guy right here, this is Henry Kincaid, and Henry Kincaid was 92 years old. This is a picture of 92 years old. So that was one of our oldest. Our oldest inmate actually at the penitentiary was Freeman Collins, who died at the penitentiary at 99 years old. So, August 13th, this was kind of a close call. Next time you go through the North Wagon Gate, Tom Walker was delivering supplies to the prison with a horse and wagon. And as he was going through the North Wagon Gate, he heard a noise. The hinges of the inside gate pulled loose, and the heavy gate fell and smashed the wagon. That was in 1897. So imagine if he would have been just a couple minutes earlier or a couple minutes later, he might not have been doing very good. So, all right, August 29th, we got a picture of Tower 3. Thank you. Boy, she's kind of a tough taskmaster, isn't she? Wow. Her sister says, oh, you don't know. All right. Thank you. Got a picture of Whitegate Cemetery. And what happened was when the inmates died prior to 1896, they were buried in the penitentiary, actually in the south part of it, that is now the South Yard. There are many rumors that there's many people buried in the North Yard. I'd love to get a ground penetrating radar in there sometime. That'd be a lot of fun. Probably wouldn't let you, and so what happened is there were people in Moundsville that were upset that inmates were being buried in town. And so in 1897, the town filled out a petition, and they moved the people about 4 miles away from the prison to Whitegate Cemetery. It's off on Tom's Run. If you go out there, it's a whole field of license plates, 240 graves. Very, very fascinating. If you've not seen Whitegate Cemetery, I strongly encourage you to go out and see it. So that starts in 1897 because the Smallsville people said, we don't want inmates buried in town. Now, what's very interesting, in Mount Rose, there's a few inmates that are kind of tucked in there, buried. What's the man who's a caretaker over there? Gary Ryder's good friend, Stoltz. Jim Stoltz, yes. Sorry, Jim. And so he is the one who can help you with that. So, all right. Now, we're at August 29th. Now we have Tower 3. And Correctional Officer Frank Berge was walking along the walls. Originally, the officers walked along the walls between the towers, and that's how they relieved each other. That's how they went ahead and brought supplies until a couple of guys fell off. They were not hurt bad. They were shaken up a little bit. But in 1904, Correctional Officer Frank Berge was walking the walls, and he was shot at. And so the bullet did not hit him, but it hit just 2 inches below his foot. So imagine walking along in just a very, very small space in the wall and getting shot at. September 13th is very interesting. There's so many books about the penitentiary. There really are. There was almost a woman hanged at the penitentiary. Madeline Dean, in 1950, she murdered Max Nixon. They called him Shamrock, and he had been harassing her, and so she took a shotgun and took care of him. And she actually was sentenced to death, was going to be hanged at the penitentiary. Very fascinating. What happened is they went back and they found that the jury said, the jury, there were actually 2 men in the jury, the foreman and another man, said, we don't care if she did it or not. She's African-American. We're going to hang her. And so they did not listen to any information. They didn't listen to any evidence. They didn't listen to anything. And so the Supreme Court of Appeals in West Virginia actually overturned her decision, her verdict of death, which I believe is probably one of the earliest overturning on racial discrimination. That'd be a great research topic if you don't have anything to do. So September 16th, kind of an interesting day. It's in 1904, 18-year-old Charlotte Hawkins, she was in the penitentiary for larceny. She delivered a healthy baby girl. She had been in prison for 17 months. I'll let you figure that out. There are going to be 8 other ladies that have babies in the penitentiary as inmates. Remember, the women inmates had a wall between by where the hospital was. The male and female inmates had no contact. So how did the women come in the family way? I'll let you figure that out. So, all right. So the next one we have is September 18th. And this shows you a picture of South Hall. This is in 1918. The original cells were, of course, they were all housed in North Wagon Gate as they were constructing the penitentiary. But in 1868, stone cells started to be put up in the one part. If you've been in the penitentiary, the contact visitation room, the room that's got the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It's got the wall with the castle, the mountain, the log cabin, and also stretches all through there, the MDR hallway. And so what happened is that was all cells, all stone cells. In 1906, they take all those stone cells out, and the picture you have there is 1918. And we actually had in the South Hall, there were a toilet and 2 bunks. Actually, probably the first penitentiary in the U.S. to actually have running water in the cells. I've not been able to prove that, but I believe looking and comparing to other penitentiaries, I believe we were the first one to ever have running water in the cells. October 1st, this is a moonshining mama. Katie Kalinsky was on trial for moonshining, and she was found guilty, and she was sentenced to 3 years. Normally, men were sentenced to 11 to 15 months. She was sentenced to 3 years because the judge said a woman should not be making moonshine. So just to let you know that. But that's the headline of her going to the penitentiary. October 5th, we talked about a couple of correctional officers. We talked to about Earl Langford. We talked about H. Evans. This is a terrible situation. And this happened on October 5th, 1972. It was William Williams, and he was killed by Bobby Jean Jarvis. And so he, very sad, served our country as a veteran and then was murdered at the penitentiary. Kind of heartbreaking. So he was the third officer that we lost at the penitentiary. October 29th, I kind of like this picture. These are kind of some dapper looking guys, kind of handsome guys. Well, you don't want to hang out with them too much because these are the Black Handers. And the Black Handers was basically a gang that had come from Italy. And what they would do is they would send threatening notes and extortion and said, if you don't pay us, we'll kill you, kidnap you, beat you up. And what we'll do is we're going to really, really hurt you. And then they would sign the letters with their hands dipped in ink. And so they were called the Black Handers. We actually had 4 Black Handers executed here. 3 were one of the first triple executions on January 4th, 1924. So this is the next on November 7th. Oh, no, let me go to November 6th. November 6th, kind of interesting. I love this story. One of the great anecdotes of November 6th. In 1903, a correctional officer, they were laying the tile for the floor for the street in Jefferson. And what happened is a correctional officer told this inmate named Docker, said, I hear you're pretty fast. And so the inmate said, oh, I'm pretty fast. And so the correctional officer said, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you a 100-foot head start. And if you can outrun me, you're free. Guess what? The inmate outran him. Last time he was seen, he was running north on Jefferson. He'd never been seen again. The correctional officer was fired. And so I don't think he wanted to wage it. You see, he was just running for a race. The other guy was running for his life. So we see. November 7th, of course, and this is very heartbreaking. November 7th was our worst escape of the penitentiary. 8:15 p.m., 15 inmates, Jack Hart, Donald Lane, Wesley Scott, Thomas Richardson, Thomas Burton, David Morgan, Ronald Williams, on and on. 15 guys go ahead and break out. They had smuggled the gun in. They took 2 officers hostage, Officer Jerry Daff in the command center. Then they went over and took Officer Jerry Villers hostage, went out through the front door. And as they're going out on Jefferson, an off-duty state trooper, Philip Kesner, and his wife Connie were driving on Jefferson. They threw Officer Daff in front of the car. The inmates pulled Philip Kesner out. As he's pulled out, he does start to fire. He pulls the revolver and he starts to fire. The 2 houses right across from the penitentiary still have bullet holes in them. One of the houses is the people that go to my church. And I'm hoping, if they're watching, someday they may give me one of those bullets that's still embedded in there. I'm just saying. And so here we see is that very, very sad situation. Now, here's a good thing. Philip Kesner was brutally murdered then right on that street. But you got to remember, both doors, the door to the 9-8 corridor, the main hallway, the door to the outside was completely open. There were 725 inmates at the time, and they were starting to run out. But as soon as they heard shots, they all went in. So we could have had the greatest mass escape, if not for Philip Kesner giving his life. So he gave the ultimate sacrifice as a peace officer. He gave his ultimate duty. He served. And so he stopped what would have been the most hugest one. So November 16th, this is an inmate, if you know anything about the penitentiary, a very famous inmate named Red. And William Snyder. William Snyder's kind of a bad guy. He was in the pen for arson and got released. He went home and he murdered his father, murdered the father of his sister's boyfriend. And he was the head of the Aryan Brotherhood. And if you do visit the penitentiary, when you go to when you go to North Hall, you go to B side and cell 21, you're going to see his writing, Aryan Brotherhood, and all that. And on this date, in 1992, on November 16th, he's murdered by a guy named Russell Lassiter. Now, on the book, this is actually a picture of him looking out at some bars. So if you're wondering, why did he put the color red? Because that's red. So then you got a little bit significance in there. The last correctional officer that we had that died in line of duty was on December 7th. And of course, it's very fascinating because it was December 7th, 1941, which is, where's my history people? What happened that day? Pearl Harbor Day. And Philip Ketchum and another correctional officer were transporting inmates back and forth to Charleston. And what happened is an inmate, Brooke Gibson, he went ahead and grabbed the revolver off of the other officer and shot him twice in the chest. He lived. He shot Philip Ketchum once, and it went through his body armor and actually killed him. So Philip Ketchum is the fourth officer that gets killed on December 7th, 1941. Something very fascinating was the warden at the time was a man named M.E. Ketchum. So the warden's son had been killed. When Gibson comes back to the penitentiary, 11 days later, he's found hanging in a cell. Suicide. Maybe. All right. December 11th. Kind of interesting. You know, in 1896, you had to hang on to your wives because there was a man named Lovey McCormick. Just in that kind of a mess. Lovey McCormick and his wife were on a boat in Huntington, and two paroled convicts, they just got paroled from the penitentiary. They all started to drink, so Lovey and his wife and the two cons were drinking, and they started flirting together. So Lovey fell asleep, and when he woke up, the inmates had run off with his wife. So just hang on to your wives when you're around inmates. December 24th. This one right here, there was the Mann Act. James Mann was a congressman of Illinois, and in 1915, he created a new law. The new law was that if you transport a woman underage for either prostitution or anything that was not of moral character, you could be arrested and charged with a felony, and that was called the Mann Act. And so a man named Joseph May served a year in the penitentiary because he was dating a young woman named Margaret Taylor. He was in his early 20s. She was 16, 17 years old. They went on a date in Pennsylvania. When they came back, they got into a fight, and she turned him in, so he got sent to the penitentiary for a year. When he gets released, he gets out, and they get married 2 months later. So, all right. How many papers do you have? Just one. So what I'm going to pass around now is in just a second. And again, give them a great job, Chadrell. Yes, excellent. Yeah, so I got put to work. So anyway, I want to talk a little bit about the books. And so the first book that I'd written about the penitentiary was called Life in the West Virginia Penitentiary. It's the blue one over there. And it's the story of Maggie Gray. She was a 21st female officer, one of the first to work in the North Hall. She is with us today. Maggie is on the wall, and her son, Rick, yes, and daughter-in-law. So if you twist her arm, then I'm sure she'll sign it. Don't twist it too hard. She was a correctional officer for 30 years. And so she can be tough, and she's very mean to me at times. So that was the first book. Next book is the tour of the West Virginia Penitentiary. I'll pass Maggie's picture about. This is that. I've got a picture of Maggie when she was, don't let Maggie have it, she'll rip it up. This is a picture of her when she was working at the pen. I know she loves that. The next book that I'd written was called The Tour of the West Virginia Penitentiary, and it's basically just kind of a guide following the tour. It follows a man named Chuck Gent, who was a correctional officer there, and so a lot of school groups use this when they have to write reports and things. The book that really is taken off, and I've been very surprised at how well it's done, is actually pronounced Dead. And that book is the one with the noose. That covers all the 94 guys that were executed, 85 by hanging, 9 by electric chair. Tells their story, their lives, their crimes, their time in the penitentiary. And one thing very interesting, the Anti-Death Penalty Coalition headquarters is actually in Pennsylvania. And from what I have been told, they love this book and they use it often. Thank you. And I thought, why in the world? I contacted them. I said, why are you using this book? And they said that this is according to them, this is the only execution book that has been written that actually has the faces of the guys that were executed. So they're using this to say, hey, you know what? Yes, they may have done something terrible or may not have, but this actually, they were human. And so very fascinating. A lot of times I get a hard time. People will say, well, how can a minister write a book about people being executed? And I tell them, well, every week I talk about a man who was executed on a cross named Jesus. So, but very fascinating. The book is in the process of a second edition. It's being re-edited. There's some grammatical errors in there. And so it's being re-edited, and they're adding quite a bit. They're adding some other stuff into it, and that should be out probably within the next 2 months, we're hoping. Then the last book I've had published was actually the 365 days that we did the presentation. So every day it's got a fact, at least 1, 2, maybe 3, 4. It's got the pictures in there. If you got a kick out of any story you heard, trust me, I had a hard time saying, oh, I want to tell this story. Well, I want to tell this one. And so that's doing a real well. And so I encourage you. And then the book Wayward Genius should be coming out. We hope to have that out by the end of the year. And that is the story of Ronald Turney Williams. At the very end is a book called One Step Closer. That's a 6-month discipleship guide, daily discipleship guide, writing out scripture. It's if you want to draw closer to God or know more of him, then encourage you. They're all on sale today. Whenever I do book shows or out in public, normally One Step Closer it's $36. They're all on Amazon, Books A Million, Barnes and Noble. One Step Closer is normally $36. We sell it at book shows for $20. Maggie's book is $15, but we sell it at book shows for $10. The Pronounced Dead in 365, they're being sold for $20. We sell them for $15. And then Chuck's book is sold, I believe it's sold for $9. We sell it for $5. If you do, we do have access to a credit card. You are able to use a credit card if you want to, or a check. If you do a credit card, we do have to add a surcharge of a couple dollars because we have to pay that. So I think I've given you a fire hydrant of information. So questions, we got a couple of minutes, I believe. Anybody have any questions? Yes.
Do you think any of the people that have been in the prison that are still alive might be watching you now give this talk?
I love it. Yes. I am either in contact with or have written or have received correspondence from about 80 inmates. And a lot of them I write, a lot of them I'll at book shows. I'm typically going to anywhere from 6 to 8 book shows. COVID took that away this year. And so, but at almost every book show, a guy will come up and he'll say, I was there. And I'll say, oh, where'd you work? He said, I didn't work there. I'll say, give me your story. And so they'll tell me their stories. And so, and I get in contact with them. I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of interviews with correctional officers and people who work there. I'm kind of in the process. We started before COVID, right? Some of you know Rich Littell. Any of you familiar with Rich Littell? We're writing a book about his life, but because of COVID right now, we're kind of taking a break. So yes, and get hold of me. And the one thing that is so important to me, when I started writing the books, I got a lot of feedback, not positive, and because everybody has a different interpretation of an event. Everyone says, well, the riot in 1973 happened on March 21st. Well, when you start to get the facts and go through the actual newspaper and go through the documents, it's happened on the 20th. And so I had a man argue on Facebook. I put a picture of the chapel, and a man said there was never a chapel at the West Virginia Penitentiary. I said, well, I've got a lot of pictures and a lot of newspaper articles about it. And so, it's tough. It's not that we're trying to argue with anyone. We just want to preserve the history. The history of the penitentiary is going to be lost if we don't record it, if we don't hang on to it and keep it. And so that's just kind of a hobby that I have, and I'm honored to do it. And I've got to meet some really neat people like Maggie, who is nice. It will be nice to all of you, except for me. So, all right. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, they're all innocent. Yeah, you won't. How many cons say they're innocent? 98%, she says. Yeah, most of them are innocent. Very, very fascinating. The book about Ronald Williams is going to shake up some people. He did not kill Philip Kesner, and I can prove that through court documentations. Every one of the guys who escaped got charged with murder, because whenever you commit a felony escape, you're charged with murder. And so people through the story have given him credit or blamed him. Now, I believe he killed David Lilly. I believe he killed John Bonacek. But Jack Hart actually killed Philip Kesner. And we actually have Jerry Daff says Jack Hart was the only one that had the gun. I saw Jack Hart. I never saw it leave his hand. And so I have that's another book, another time, the 79 Breakout. I have 1,700 pages of documentation, court testimonies, witnesses, bios, everything. And so that down the road, the 79 Escape is one. So now, of course, Williams does not claim he's guilty for the other two, but there was some stuff that went on in the trials that was against him that shouldn't have been. One of the main witnesses in the first murder later goes back and says, I lied. He didn't do it. So we wrapping up? Or,
You're good. Keep going.
okay, any other questions? Okay. Thank you so much for letting me come out. I've enjoyed this. Please stop by my wife in the back, Janine. She's going to be manning the book table. And please, before you leave, though, do come up and look at the picture. I mean, how many times do you actually see a picture of someone who was executed? He made this in about November. Here is the letter that he wrote the young girl. This is a little bit about the information. So he was the last person executed in West Virginia on April 3rd, 1959. And very interesting. Elmer Bruner had a tough life. You can read his story and pronounced dead. But a tough guy, lived a life of crime, was kind of a mess. But what happened is he and another man broke into Ruby Miller's house in Huntington, and she ends up getting knocked off with a hammer. And Elmer Bruner said that he did not do it. And he actually went to the electric chair saying, I did not do this. He was working with the ministers in town. They were meeting with him regularly. And he wrote out on a yellow pad, he wrote, this is every crime that I've committed. He said, but I did not kill her. And so, you know what? Have innocent men been hanged in the West Virginia Penitentiary? Could have been. So a lot of interesting stuff. But the books tell you about it. And again, thank you so much. We're very honored to be here.
Thank you. So I want to make one little announcement about the last installment in this series. So this is actually the last Hungry for History in person. So we've got one more, but it's going to be only virtual. So we're not going to have people here. He's not even going to be here. He's going to be doing it from his house, videoing it, and it's going to be live on Facebook and live on YouTube, but there will be nothing here next week. So that is the last one for this year. So we do have some exciting events planned for hopefully fall and winter. We're already starting to think about next summer. So keep an eye on our website, on our Facebook. We'll have more things posted. And thank you to everyone who's come to this one, anyone who's come to all of them. And we hope to see you next year.
Miss Maggie's arm, she'll probably sign a book for you.